I've just got a couple things to add to what Ed said, because I think out of all the people in the room, I probably have pretty much the most experience in running campaigns, and not running for office, but running campaigns. And when I'm a campaign manager of a statewide campaign, as I've been 2 or 3 times, or even of local campaigns or running for my office myself, staff is one of the most important things you could acquire as early as possible. Ed put the 3 key staff people out there that you have to run a legitimate campaign. You have to have a campaign manager, you have to have a treasurer legally, and you need a volunteer coordinator. There are adjunct people. If you're running a statewide campaign, you need meeting coordinators, you need fundraising coordinators, schedulers, things like that. But those 3 key people that Ed put up there are the most important, because when I ran a campaign, and Michael, if he hadn't left, will admit I'm right on this, the campaign candidate, after the declaration of candidacy and the nomination, is responsible, from my perspective, for doing 2 things: talking to voters and asking for money. The candidate will not be writing on the blog 34 hours a day. The candidate will not be designing campaign materials, designing the website, or doing all those other things that, unless you're running a sole person campaign for a relatively small office, that you don't have time to do. If you want to take a serious shot at getting elected and having a major impact on political discussion that you're involved with in whatever district you're in, you can't be doing all that stuff. You have to concentrate on what your message is, on presenting that message to voters, and on raising money. I had a candidate for governor in 2000 who was genetically incapable of asking people for money, and it handicapped our campaign. 2 years later, I had a candidate for Secretary of State in Indiana, and she single-handedly raised $43,000. And I think, to my knowledge, that's probably the most money we spent on a libertarian political campaign in Indiana, right, Mark? Anybody else think of Dylan spend more or something? Okay. Anyway, and with that money, we were able to do a lot of things that we would not have been able to do. We were able to run hundreds, if not thousands, of radio spots the last 10 days of the campaign. We were able to publish a newspaper called the Hoosier Libertarian that we published 250,000 copies of and distributed them around the state. But those are not something, Rebecca Sinkeros religiously called people, asked them for money, and talked to voters. She didn't get involved in any of the other stuff. So if you're going to make a serious run for office, I would ask you to identify, at the very least, a campaign manager, a treasurer, which Mark and Todd will speak to earlier, to make sure that you don't end up before the Indiana Election Commission having to talk your way out of fines, as some people have done in the past, or your county election board, and a volunteer coordinator. And when people volunteer, make sure, as Ed said, that you give them something to do, because they're interested enough in you and in your message to come forward. It's abjectly important for you to give them something to do. Not on a daily basis, but as often as possible.
And sometimes people have watched The Candidate with Robert Redford too many times, and they think that it's paid staff, paid staff, paid staff. Dan Burton has paid staff. Evan Bayh is going to have paid staff, but most of your House candidates don't have paid staff. They may, the county office may coordinate a lot of stuff. Your county chairs will help you coordinate stuff. But if you're running for a state house race and somebody asks you, hey, I'll be your campaign manager, but it's going to cost you this, this, and this. Well, you just heard the most that any libertarians ever raised is $40,000
in Indiana
for 1 year's salary. So you've got to use every bit. There are so many. The thing that I love about the Libertarian Party, especially in Indiana, is that people run for office and help our candidates because they're passionate about the cause. And if you can't find somebody who's passionate about helping you for free and volunteering their time, supporting you, then maybe you don't want that person helping you. So when people ask, and I promise you, they will ask you if they can be paid staff, just politely say, I'd love to, but I've got to make sure that that money goes to getting out more flyers, getting out more materials.
The other thing that came up during Ed's presentation that I wanted to expand upon just a little bit was the idea of voter registration lists and walking lists and mailing lists. Strategically, several years ago, during one of the city county council races, our candidate raised more money than both the Republican and Democratic candidates put together, and still only ended up with about 70% of the vote, because his campaign staff made what I thought was a strategic mistake in targeting Republican voters in a heavily Republican district, rather than disaffected or people who hadn't voted at all voters. And I think that he would have gotten a lot more votes had he done what I advised him to. They ignored my advice, and that's just the way it goes. You can't win them all. But those lists are very important. Ed kind of flashed it up there quickly, but when you get the walking list or the voter registration list, it ought to give you information about what elections that person voted in over the past 5 or 6 election cycles. I think I forget how far back they go. It will tell you if they voted in a primary and which primary they pulled a ballot for, Republican or Democrat. If they didn't vote in a primary and voted in the general election consistently over the past several cycles, that might be one of your target voters. Because that's a person who is not self-identified as a Republican or Democrat and is perhaps more open to a third party or Libertarian Party candidate coming in there. And I think that if you, Ed did a perfectly legitimate target with targeting Republicans, where the Republicans forgot to nominate somebody in his district, or didn't want to nominate somebody because they didn't want to go up against an incumbent Democrat.
And it helped him get within 100 votes of the Democrat, of
Within
what
50,
within 50 of what the
Republican
candidate typically
Absolutely. So when you get those lists, be smart. The state party does get the voter registration list from the Secretary of State every year or every other year. We do have limited access to manipulating that data and getting information out to people. I do want to point out, though, notwithstanding what Chris said earlier, he is the employee of the State Libertarian Party Central Committee, my employee. He is not the employee of every candidate that's going to be running for election in 2010, because if he tried to do that, we would get nothing done. If Chris is going to give support on a daily basis to any of our candidates, my decision is going to be the Secretary of State candidate, because that's the most important to us. You are libertarians. Remember personal responsibility as well as personal freedom. Do your own research, get your own staff, answer your own questions if at all possible.
That being said, though, I do this for a living. I do this on a day in, day out. I'm a full-time employee. My business is a Libertarian Party business. I probably know the answer, so don't be afraid to call me or email me preferably, because that helps me keep stuff.
But don't bitch to me if you don't get an answer like immediately, okay? Don't complain to me. Sorry to the videotape. Any other questions of Ed or about this segment about managing the middle part of the campaign?
Keep a diary too.
Yes.
Eric?
I had a question regarding the campaign staff. Can this be anybody, or are there any restrictions?
It can be anybody.
The only restriction is in Indiana, if somebody is a county chair, they cannot be a campaign treasurer. Right, Mark?
I believe so.
Okay.
That
Well, at least that's what
is
Cheryl
correct,
Piercy
yeah.
claims she could do something several years ago. Any?
Yeah, can you elaborate on the voter list? You mentioned that you get them as part of the party, but you can't.
We buy them from the Secretary of State every year, and I'm not a tech person, so
it's
somebody
part-
who knows, bring me up to date
It
on
is
what
part
we're
of our
doing.
agreement that we don't use that for candidates. We cannot provide that to candidates. We can use that to build our state party and our county parties. But when it comes to the statewide list, I get it in a giant document file that I can't even open.
Mhm.
And so we have to go through companies that can parse that out. Those private companies he talked about, Aristotle, Labels and Lists, eMerges, and they do a great job of providing those walking lists and doing the things and saving you some time. I'd call Aristotle, get a hold of me, I'll hook you up with Aristotle, eMerges, or Labels and Lists, and price that out with them and raise that money. Because it's part of our agreement with those companies that we cannot provide it to candidates, because that's how they make their living. So I've got to say that. One more thing, when you're walking and knocking on doors, keep a diary. Every time you go walking, write down, I went to this address, this team went to this address, write down what you said to them. Just helps you keep track. If you find a friendly face in June, you want to make sure you go back in August and October. So it's a long summer. When you're running for office, you've got kids, you've got a job, and so you want to make sure you keep yourself motivated. So I want to thank you guys. I want to thank Ed. Ed, thank you.